Good morning. I'm Craig Pouncey, Superintendent of Jefferson County Schools. I wanted to just take a few minutes this morning and introduce myself to the most important people in Jefferson County, and that's you, the teachers. We've been involved in the last few weeks in what I cast as the transformation of teaching and learning. I've included on this video a copy of Dr. Bice's presentation that he has mounted and presented all over the whole state. It really causes us, particularly us old-timers, to really stretch what we have thought was proper teaching and learning. In the past, we were always guided by pacing guides, by what our assessment results were. We assumed that all children learned the same way and were measured the same way. In reality, that's not the truth, and you know it's not because you've been in the classroom just as long as most of us. What I've asked our principals to do is, as Dr. Bice cast it, imagine what if. Imagine what if no longer are we guided by, are we in chapter 1, page 22 today. Imagine if I'm a first grade teacher, I'm not necessarily teaching the same things in the same manner as my co-teacher who's next door. Imagine if we transform teaching and learning based on the individual needs of our students. One class may be different than the other, and that's okay. Administrators are trying to grasp this as a possibility, and I really wanted to share with the teachers of Jefferson County the opportunities that you have ahead of you, because I know from time to time we as school administrators have restricted you from doing certain things, but I know if our goal is in the year 2020 to ensure that 90% of our kids graduate and are college and career ready, we're going to have to consider doing things differently. No longer is learning a time and a place, but learning is an activity that occurs based on what a child is engaged in. And for that reason, I felt it was important that I shared with you this message this morning and also shared with you the insightful vision of Dr. Bice. I know that all of you are involved in your leadership teams at your schools, and we are asking that you think outside the box as we go forward so that we can truly meet the needs of our children. Thank you for what you do every day. Jefferson County is a great place to be, and I'm humbled to be able to work on your behalf and on behalf of the children of Jefferson County. Y'all have a great day, and we appreciate what you're doing. Thank you.
I want to make your time worthwhile, so there are three things that I want to accomplish with you tonight. I want to give you a snapshot, just briefly, of where we were in public education just a few years ago. A real quick snapshot of where we are in public education, but most importantly, where we're headed in public education, because we are excited. We're excited about some of the things that are going on now. We've got a lot of work to do, and we need to engage broader groups of people. That's why I'm so glad that students are here tonight, that parents are here tonight, that community members are here tonight, educators are here tonight, because we all, if we come together to work toward what's right for our children, it's remarkable what we can do. For those of you in the audience who don't know me, for me to have any credibility, I think it's important for you to understand where I come from and my perspective as a teacher in Alabama. When I interviewed for the job as state superintendent 2.5 years ago, when I went in for my interview, I was asked before it started, is there anything that you need to share with us before we begin? And I said, there probably is, and let's just go ahead and get this on the table, and if you'll bear with me, you'll see tonight that I'm pretty straightforward. I told them, first of all, that I've done this work for over 30 years, and that I have, in every single situation where I've ever worked, always made decisions based on what's right for children, regardless of the political winds that are blowing out there that have sometimes kept me in trouble. But I welcome that, because I will never apologize when you do things that are right for children. I also shared with them that politically I'm an independent. I don't need a political party to tell me what to think. I have 735,000 constituents, and those are our students in the state of Alabama and their parents, and that's who I serve, not a political party. And I also asked their permission, is my third thing, is if they were willing to allow me to have this job for whatever period of time I could have it, would they be willing to let me challenge the way we've done things in public education? Because, as Randy said, I've served as pretty much everything, every job there is to do in public education, and nothing drove me crazier, whether I was a classroom teacher, a high school principal, a career tech director, a bus driver, whatever, than a bunch of bureaucrats in Montgomery or Washington, even better, telling me how I needed to serve the children at my local level, because I am convinced that if we turn the intellectual capital that is involved in our local faculties in our schools, it will be amazing what they can do. And we regretfully, because of a lot of laws from Washington and from our own state, have restricted the creativity that lives in our classrooms, in our teachers, and our children. So reluctantly, they said yes. So we began a journey, and the first thing we did was we said, what would we do in public education in the state of Alabama if we wiped away all the rules from Washington, from the legislature, from the governor's office, and created a plan that was right for children? Totally from scratch. What would that look like? The first thing we did, and Randy, you mentioned it already, was we didn't sit down and talk among ourselves. We began a 3-month process, and I took a group of people with me, and we visited with every community college in the state of Alabama. We went to every 4-year college in the state of Alabama and met with their education faculty and their arts and science faculty. But most importantly, we went from Florence to Dothan, from Scottsboro to Mobile, all across the state of Alabama, meeting with business and industry. Because ultimately, when kids leave high school, they either go to work, they go to a community college, they go to a 4-year college, but in the end, hopefully, they all go to work. And we went about that process asking one question, only one question of all those groups of individuals. And that question was, what is it about Alabama high school graduates today that is missing when you get them? And we did that for 3 months, and we pulled all of that information back together, and we sat down at the department, and very quickly, an unexpected, overarching concern rose that was the same for business and industry, that was the same for our 2-year colleges, and was the same for our 4-year colleges. And that overarching concern was that kids that were leaving Alabama high schools lack intellectual curiosity. And I want you to think about that for a minute. The children that were leaving a 13-year education, potentially, left that program without intellectual curiosity, which to me missed the whole point of why we have public education. We want them to leave with the curiosity to continue to learn. So as a brand new state superintendent, that was the absolute worst news I could have gotten, literally. Because I thought, how in the world do we take a system made up of 735+ thousand kids in 136 school systems, 90,000 employees if you count all of our support staff, in 1,500 schools that have been going in one direction, and try to shift that monster to go in a different direction. But it got real excited when we sat down and really started digging deep into that as to why we had gotten to this place. And for those of you in the room who've had children in school, who are in schools, who teach in schools, or have had anything to do with schools will know this. We realized very quickly why this has happened. We've spent over a decade preparing children to take a test rather than preparing children to think. And we said, what can we do to change this dynamic? And we're so pleased that we've gotten a waiver from No Child Left Behind, that we can now do what's right for Alabama, that we've put our assessments in a whole new category. While we need them to inform instruction, we don't need them to make lists and to judge people and to judge children. We need them to inform instruction. And when you do that, you begin to see unbelievable things happening in classrooms. When teachers aren't afraid that in the end of spring, there's some ridiculous test that's going to be given that everybody that's ever taught in a classroom knows for absolute certain could never capture the magic that happened in that classroom throughout the year. So we're working hard to reframe that. So we looked at, and we didn't come up with this by accident. I'm a firm believer that research can tell us a lot of things. And we're real susceptible in education to latch on to the next best thing that comes along. And there's a lot of people that got a lot of stuff to sell us. But we know what the research tells us, Marla. We know that the only variable that can move children from point A to point B is an effectively prepared and resourced and supported teacher that's given the opportunity to do the work that we've asked them to do, that works in a school with a dynamic leader that sees a vision far beyond getting the doors locked and the floors polished, that understands instruction and can talk the talk and lead a faculty down a road toward reform. And in a system with a visionary leader who's not afraid to challenge the status quo, that's not afraid to challenge the way things have always been done, that's what we knew could happen. So we developed a plan around the 4 things that research told us if we did it right, we'd get a different result. That's looking at our learners. What do we need to do differently to make sure that our children become thinkers and creators, not doers of tests? How do we create a support system so that those children who come to school not ready to learn have the supports they need to do the work that we're asking them to do? And let me go ahead and give you a statistic right now to show how important that piece is. Last year in the state of Alabama, we served 95 million lunches. 64% of them were free. 64% of them were free. We know for absolute certain that poverty is a huge issue for us, but it is absolutely not an excuse. We have to make sure, if we know that kids that come to school hungry, that don't have a place to live, that don't have all the needs they have, that we develop a system around which to support those children. And we have example after example after example. When the grown folks are willing to get off their turf and do what's right for children, that can happen. And Shelby County is one of our 10 pilots in this first process. And I'm going to share something about it in a minute. Professionals, how do we rethink? How do we prepare teachers? How do we demand that teachers have the support and resources they need? How do we develop new leaders that are thinking about creating school that may or may not look like school that we're used to? That's a whole piece of this whole professional piece of it. And finally, the part that probably excites me the most is, what could schools and school systems look like if we would let go of what we think they have to look like? Let me ask you 3 questions just to get your mind in the process of where this whole talk is headed. Where is it written in law or in code that school has to happen between 7:30 and 3 every day? Where is it written in law or in code that school has to happen between Monday and Friday? Where is it written in law or in code that school has to happen between August and May? None of those 3 things exist. Why do we continue to do them? Because that's the way we've always done school. There is nothing that says when school has to occur, on what day or what time. If we begin to look at the needs of children, I can tell you we'd probably do it very, very differently, but we continue to do it based on an industrial model that's based on putting kids through school based on their birthdays in batches and spitting them out at some point later, rather than on the individual needs of children. So we've created a policy environment so every single child could have a different pathway to get to graduation that disrupts the whole thing we think of as school. Boy, that's exciting. And the thing that I like the most is, I've learned over these 30 years, is disruption's a good thing. Because when you cause enough disruption, people begin to change and rethink the way they do it. So I have purposefully, and don't apologize for it, tried to cause as much disruption as I can, making as many changes as quickly as we can to get people to thinking, because I also know in the political environment we work in, I won't last long in this job, so we better get it done quick while we've got time to do it. But the first thing we had to do was think about what our vision is. Our vision has always been every child a graduate. But you know what we learned from business and industry and the people we talk to? It really doesn't matter if they just graduate if they're not prepared for what comes next. And you heard from our partners at the community college that 50% of the people that go to Jeff State are in remedial education. That is unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. Why in the world should a child that graduates from Helena High School, I know this will never happen, by the way, not at Helena High School, but it happens all across the state, get a diploma that says they've met all of our expectations for graduation, and 2 months later when they start at Jeff State, they're enrolled in remedial education. As a parent of 3 children in public education, why in the world should my tax money pay for a 13-year education and them get something that says they've met expectations, and 2 months later I'm paying tuition for the same thing I thought they just got? Unacceptable. So we've added, and our state board has embraced this, and our school systems have embraced it, that not only should every child be a graduate, but they should be prepared for what comes next based on the expectations of who gets them, not on the expectations of some ridiculous law from Washington or something that a bunch of legislators got together and dreamed up. We need to be talking to the people who get our kids. Let me show you how far off we were, just to put it in perspective, not as an excuse of the work we've done previously, but to put in perspective why we need to do this new work. I was a high school principal for years at Benjamin Russell High School in Alexander City. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. So I can speak to this and say for absolute certain one of the biggest waste of times we ever did was the Alabama graduation exam. We took 20 days of instruction out of the school year to give an exam that didn't lead to anything that came next. And just to show you how far off we were, and I'm so thankful that within the first few months on the job, I went to our state board and said we need to do away with the graduation exam and replace it with something that's meaningful, and they said yes and voted, and we put it to sleep. But the last time we gave it, we looked at all the seniors across the state of Alabama, 50,000 strong, and said, how did they do on the graduation exam? And if you look at the results, 97% of them passed all 5 parts of the graduation exam. And we put up billboards, we made signage, we had ice cream parties, we gave out certificates. We did all the stuff as if we'd accomplished something. And all we really accomplished was to give a group of children and their parents a false sense of security about what they could do when they went next, to be perfectly honest, all because we were held restricted by a federal law called No Child Left Behind. And as a former special ed teacher, was exactly what we needed when we got it 12 years ago. But it's far outlived its purposefulness and should have been revised years ago. But because it wasn't, we're getting this result. And to put it in perspective, if you take those same 50,000 students that were our senior class that year, and you take the 76% of them that took the ACT, which we know were only those students who were thinking about furthering their education, so we know absolutely who wasn't in that number. If you take the 76% who took the ACT and look at mathematics, 31% of the 76% met the college readiness benchmark on the ACT, which is a 22. At the same time, 97% of them met the expectations on the graduation exam. And if we really want to make a difference in public education, we have to say things out loud that are uncomfortable. If you look at our black students that were part of the 76% who took the ACT, 4% of the black students who took the ACT met the college readiness benchmark in math, which is a 22. Unacceptable. Because there is nothing that will ever convince me, because I've worked in all black systems, I've worked in full poverty systems, there is nothing that will ever convince me in my life that being black and poor doesn't mean you can't succeed in school. Not if we have the right expectations and the right systems to make that happen. So we knew that if we're going to make this happen, we had to change our expectations of where we wanted students to go. So that's our challenge. That's why we're doing these meetings, is to engage as many people as we can in this shift from preparing kids to take a test and make this dreaded thing that we call adequate yearly progress. And if you're a teacher in this room tonight, or anybody in this room tonight, that has anything in your room or in your possession that says adequate yearly progress or AYP, burn it in the morning. Burn it. Burn it. Because if we continue to shoot for that, we're going to get the exact same thing we've always gotten. And we could end up looking like the picture to your left. It's a classroom that looks like it's probably from the 1950s. And I can assure you kids today aren't looking forward to going to that. But what encourages me is we change from adequate yearly progress to college and career readiness. And let me go ahead and do this disclaimer, because I get a lot of credit for things I say and don't say. So what I am saying about being college and career ready is not that I expect every single child that graduates from an Alabama high school to go to Auburn University and get a PhD in chemistry. But what I am saying is that every child that graduates from Alabama high school should have a choice when they leave, and we have not been preparing children so that all of them have an equitable choice when they leave. So we're shifting to college and career readiness. And this last picture, this picture on your right, is the one that drives it home for me. Most of you would have no reason to know this unless I've been to your system, but I made the promise when I took this job that every week, regardless of what was going on, I would visit a school somewhere in the state of Alabama, because I wanted to stay grounded on what's really happening in public education. I don't care what the governor wants. I don't care what the legislature wants. I don't care what the state board wants. I'm going to go to a school somewhere. I do not call people and tell them I'm coming. Not that I'm coming to surprise you and try to get you, but y'all all know how this works, is if they call and say the state superintendent's coming to your school, they'll close the library and have muffins and orange juice and invite the board and do all this kind of stuff. Y'all know how this works, and I am no event to be had. So nobody knows I'm coming except my secretary, Leanne. I show up at 6:30. I get there in time to help unload the buses and do that whole scenario so I can see how that works. And then I say, put me in a classroom. I don't care where. Put me in a classroom. I stay in that classroom all morning, and then I go to lunch with the kids. Love it that kids are here tonight. I go to lunch with the kids, and I sit at the kids' table, because if you really want to know what's going on in school, you sit at the lunchroom table with the kids, and they will tell you what's going on. But this was the last school I visited, the last school I visited before school was out in May. It was at Caslin Elementary School in rural Mobile County, as close to Mississippi as you can get without going to Mississippi. You could see Mississippi over there. And they have a 90% poverty rate. It's rural. If you don't know that you're going to Castle Elementary School, you would have no reason to go there because it is in the middle of nowhere. So poor kids, rural, all the things about those kids don't learn like other kids. I walked into this fifth grade classroom, and I now carry this as the greatest burden I carry as state superintendent in the most positive way, because this is what I observed when I walked in there. These children engaged in instruction. They never looked up. They didn't care that I was there, which is what every classroom should be like if they're engaged in what they're learning. I finally had to go over to the little boy in the orange shirt and say, "Tell me what you're doing. Tell me what you're doing." He said, "Well, we're creating code." And I went, "Really? Tell me what code is." I was faking it, like I knew what he was talking about. And he said, "We're creating code." I said, "Well, what is code? And give me a little background." He said, "Well, it's really computer science, but our teacher has told us not to use that term with adults because it's somewhat intimidating. But it's really," you ask kids, they tell you. And he said, "But it's really just math that's fun." I said, "That's cool. Tell me more about it. What are you going to do with this code?" He said, "Well, if you'll look over here on the other side of the table, you'll see a little boy's hand on something that looks like a creature." He said, "Our teacher reached out to our community colleges and to business and industry and brought some folks in to help us build these robots." So they built these robots, and their job was to create the code to program these robots. And I said, "Well, once you do that, what are you going to do?" And you can't see this in the picture, but they went into their classroom, took all the furniture out of the classroom, partnered with their high school and their career tech programs at the high school, and they had literally built a cityscape in their classroom with buildings and streets and detours and construction zones. It looked like a little city in their classroom. Neatest thing I've ever seen. So their job was to create the computer code to program their robots to traverse this streetscape. I sat there mesmerized for 3 hours, not having a clue what they were doing, but I faked it good. They knew exactly what they were doing. They did this, and finally it got to the point they were ready to go, and I sat there and watched 8 little robots, one by one, turned loose, and without exception, every one of them traversed that cityscape and came back to the beginning. And what that told me was, poor rural kids in Mobile County have never been told they can't be smart. And they had a teacher, and this was the most profound thing, Suzanne, that I heard when I was there. The teacher pulled me inside, and she says, "Dr. Bice, the only way we were able to do this was, as a teacher, I was willing to be vulnerable enough to say that I don't understand this either, but I won't let my inability to understand this hold my children back from what I know they can understand, and I'll reach out to people who can come in and help me." And she sat down with her children and their partners from post-secondary and business and industry and said, "Guys, we're going to learn together. We're going to learn together." That is a brave teacher. It will step out and say, "I don't understand this, guys, but I'm not going to let it hold you back." That was the most profound thing I've heard from a teacher in a long time. And when teachers are willing to do that and be vulnerable and learn with their kids, there's no telling where we can go if we partner with other people. So it tells me this is the goal. Why isn't everybody in Alabama able to do this at the level? 5th grade children creating computer code to program a robot to traverse a cityscape. Good gracious, people, our kids can do this work. So how are we going to get there? We redefined the high school graduate. Was the first thing. I've already talked about it. They need to possess the knowledge and skills needed to enroll and succeed in credit-bearing first-year courses at 2-year and 4-year colleges, trade schools, technical schools, or workforce training programs without the need for remediation. It is unacceptable that remediation rate does not go down, and I will tell you, we just got an update on it yesterday, and our remediation rate over the last 2 years has gone down by 5%. That is significant. It's significant. At the same time, we're asking more of our students. That's how this works. The best part of this, though, is the other side of this definition. This is what business and industry and higher ed and our education partners said is missing, that they possess the ability to apply what they know and the skills they have to real-world situations, to be able to collaborate with their peers in problem-solving, critical thinking, and being able to defend their answers in writing or verbally, and a desire to be a lifelong learner. That's where the grown folks come into play. That's where teachers today have to begin to do things differently than what I'm doing to you tonight. That teachers are no longer the disseminator of information. They're a collaborator of learning. And one of the favorite schools I've been to right before school was out was B.B. Comer High School in Talladega County. To make sure that they didn't fall back into the old way of doing this work, there's not a desk in their school. Not asking you to go sell your desk right now. They sold every desk in the building. There's not a desk there. They have round tables where kids sit together in groups. The teacher walks around. This is the most exciting part, and I know in Shelby County, Randy Fuller, you would never let this happen. Shelley Mize, where are you? Tarrant, you'd never have this going on in Tarrant. They banned the teacher corner. Where's Anne Marie Corrigal, our teacher, State Teacher of the Year? There she is, Alabama Teacher of the Year. I know you don't have one of these in your room either. In some rooms, in other systems not represented here tonight, Craig Pouncey in Jefferson County, teachers build their little content kingdom back over in the corner of the room where their desk is and their computer is, and they disseminate learning out from there to children in hopes they get it. They banned the teacher corner. So the teacher is actually up throughout the day going from table to table, inquiring about what kids are doing, what they're learning, asking probing questions. It is a constant take and give between teacher and student. The most interesting part of that is when they made that shift, 50% of the faculty left. 50% of the faculty left. And you know why? They're not willing to do the new work that kids need today to be expressive learners and critical thinkers. And we've got absolutely wonderful educators in our school, but regretfully we have a few cave dwellers, citizens against virtually everything, that need to go do something else. And I tell our administrators, you make darn sure these exit signs stay lit so the people who don't want to do this work with our children have a very clear exit out of the building so they can go do something else. And because we've got a lot of folks, we've got a lot of young talent that are ready to get in there and do this work with these kids. They're itching to do it. And some of these people just need to get out of the way. And they did at B.B. Comer High School, and their academic achievement is soaring because they're now doing something different. How do we know if we're making a difference? One of the things we did as part of Plan 2020 that Trish Crane would stay on me if I didn't do this. I know her well. We have everything in that plan has a measure and an outcome and a way to know if we're actually making a difference. One of the first things we did was say, what does the graduation rate need to look like? What does it need to look like by the year 2020? And we looked at where we were in 2012, and we were at 72% graduation rate. And we said out loud, that is not acceptable. So where do we need to be by the year 2020? And we set a goal of 90% graduation rate by the year 2020. And I'm going to admit something to you tonight that I've done in all 9 of these, that somebody asked me in the first one, and I just owned it, is they said, what formula did you use? How did you determine what you were going to use to get to that 90% graduation rate by the year 2020? I woke up one morning and just made it up. I just made it up because I know how we do things in education. Dickie Barlow, you'd never do this in your school system, but we've done it across the state for years. We'll identify a problem, and we'll set up a committee, and that committee will meet for 8 months talking about the problem, and then they'll pass it on to the central office, and they'll set up a committee, and they'll talk about it for another 8 months, and then God help us, it goes to the board, and the politicalness starts, and we're going to debate that for 9 more months, and we've got a whole group of students who just missed 2 years of education. So I just decided we're just going to set 90% because I believe in our students, and I believe in our teachers that they can do this work. And then we did the arithmetic. We sat down and did the arithmetic, which you may hear that we currently don't teach in public education, but we actually still do. And we decided that we actually have to increase by 2% each year to get to 90% by the year 2020. And we said to our school system something very, very different. Ricky Darby, you know how we've done this work previously. In Montgomery, we'd all get together. Craig and I, we fought this for years when we were down there, and then he bailed on me, but I'm proud of you, buddy. I miss him terribly. But the way we did things was we'd get together in Montgomery, a whole bunch of us would get together, and we'd decide this is what needs to be done to fix the dropout issue and the graduation rate in the state of Alabama. And we'd come up with this plan, and we'd call our 136 school systems and say, this is what you've got to do in Shelby County, in Tarrant, in Mountain Brook, in Elliott City, and we all had to do it the same way, and we sent about 536,000 forms that you had to fill out to show that you did it. And we looked at the last 10 years of how that worked for us. We made almost no difference in changing the dropout rate or the graduation rate after spending almost $1 billion to try to fix it, because we were telling 136 school systems this is how you need to do it. So we said, this ain't working. Let's do something different. So rather than that, we said, here's your data, here's the trajectory. 136 of you go back, and you sit down with your parents, with your local business, with your community. You come up with as many innovative ways to get toward graduation as you can, and we're not going to mess with you. Except for those few school systems that don't do what's right for children, we're going to stay all in their business until they get it right. But the majority of our school systems and our teachers and our administrators and parents need to be turned loose to go do this innovative work. And when we did that, in the first year, rather than increasing by 2%, we increased by 3%. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but for every percent, that's 800 more high school graduates. 800 people whose lives are different. And that was in a year which I'm sure Ricky Darby, Patrick Chappell at Homewood, y'all were still thinking, the state's told us for 25 years, if we do this kind of stuff, they're going to come get us. You're still thinking that. You didn't believe that we weren't going to ask for those 5,000 pieces of paper, but you did it anyway. The second year, when you actually believed we weren't going to come get you, if you did something innovative for children, it increased by 5% in the second year. So in 2 years, our graduation rate increased by 8%. We're now at an 80% graduation rate, 2 years ahead of where we expected to be. And there is no magic. There is no magic to that other than we turned 132 school systems loose to go do what's right for children, and we're fixing the ones that weren't doing what's right for children. That's the result you get when you believe in your people and you turn them loose and give them the resources and space to do this innovative work. For the few that don't, let me just give you a statistic how that can happen and be a positive thing too. I know she's not here tonight, Demica's not here tonight, who's the superintendent in Midfield. But at the second month on the job, Craig and I had to step into Midfield City Schools and take them over. The state took over Midfield City Schools. They had a 46% graduation rate. You would not even want to walk into that school because it was total bedlam. There was no instruction going on. They had police in every hall. Half the teachers weren't coming to school because they didn't want to be there. They couldn't even get substitutes to come, so kids were just rampantly running through the building. Bedlam. Walked in, first day, you got rid of the superintendent, got rid of the CFO, got rid of the high school principal, did something to the middle school principal. Half the faculty were asked to go away. 2 years later, with new leadership, they have an 80% graduation rate, and I would welcome any of you to go to Midfield High School. To go to Midfield High School and walk into one of their classrooms and see some of the most engaging instruction that you can see. And the lesson learned there is the children are still the same. The grown folks changed. That's what needs to happen in some of these school systems that aren't doing what's right for children. But most of you just need to be turned loose. Think about a report that's just been done by a third party from an economist at AUM and Jim Williams at Parka. They looked at Plan 2020 and said, what would the impact on the state of Alabama be when we reach a 90% graduation rate? They did the statistics, and they've equated it to $435 million a year into Alabama's economy. Every year we maintain a 90% graduation rate, which has the same economic impact as a Mercedes or an Airbus opening in Alabama. Every year we maintain that rate. Folks, that's the answer to our budget problems. That's the answer. When you want to talk to your legislature about how to fix our budget, fund the things that we now are showing you that work. Get out of our way and let us do this important work, and we can fix the education budget because the two funds that fund public education are income tax and sales tax. So people who graduate and get a job earn more, and people who earn more spend more. We can be our own solution to the problem if we can get them to get behind the things that are currently working. So how are other ways we're going to get there? One way is to set new academic expectations for our children that we refer to as Alabama's College and Career Ready Aligned Standards. You will hear that called a lot of things. You'll hear it called the Common Core. You'll hear it called this. You'll hear it called that. Let me go ahead and just put this out there. I am the only living human being in the state of Alabama that in 2008 was in a meeting in Chicago, Illinois, with 49 other fellow educators sitting around tables, as we do, talking about what we do in our states. And we ask each other this question: what do you do in your state to develop standards in math and science and English and all these other things? What do you do in California? What do you do in Illinois? What do you do in Massachusetts? What do you do in Alabama? What do you do in Colorado? And we began to see that we're all doing some of the same stuff, but people are getting different results. These people are getting phenomenal results with this one, and we're getting phenomenal results there. And we said, wouldn't it make sense that if we pull the best of everything together into something that we could consider being some set of standards that states could look at and bring back to their states and voluntarily adopt if they want to, do with it whatever they need to? Wouldn't that be a good idea? We said yes. We went about that process. We engaged as many people as we could in it. We brought it back to Alabama. We didn't adopt those sight unseen. We asked teachers and administrators and professors from our universities to come in and say, look at these standards and you give us your input about what you think is good, right, or wrong about this. We did that. They decided they wanted more for our students in Alabama, so we added standards to it. I could go on and on about the process. We did public hearings across the state. We tried to give everybody in God's name the chance to weigh in on them. And let me just say this. Barack Obama was not in the room the day that we had that meeting. Arne Duncan in the U.S. Department of Education did not direct the meeting and tell us what to do. I've been on the job for 2.5 years. I have not called the Office of Common Core because it doesn't exist, nor the President to ask permission for anything we've done in public education in the state of Alabama, nor have I received a call. So what you may hear about what we're doing may or may not be true. And the reason this is important is not about that. That's just a whole political game that people are playing. The reason it's important is that we need children to begin to learn to think critically and problem solve. And the way you do that is, we've taught math forever in the state of Alabama, and we're still teaching it. We're still teaching the basic algorithms of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. But after we've taught it, we're now asking our children to do something with it. And that's what it means with these new standards. They're not that different other than what we've added to it. And what that looks like in reality is, with these nice little fourth and fifth graders over here that I met earlier today, rather than doing what we've done to them forever, I know in your school you would never have this happen to you. But in the schools where I used to be in charge of, we did it, and I'm so ashamed we did it. We would ask kids to add 3-digit numbers and come up with the correct sum, and our teachers would give them a bunch of problems to work while she went over here and did something else. And then after they finished working them, we'd give you a worksheet to take home with about 50 more of those problems on it, and you'd go home and you'd work them as much as you could. And at my house with 3 boys, I ended up doing most of their homework for them anyway because they're not going to do 50 problems in math. And so you never really knew what the children knew. Y'all know how this works. I mean, that's the way it works. So at the end of the day, the only thing we could possibly have known from that was that they could do math. What we do now, after they may have done that, we come back and say, and let's say you're my 5th grade class. Based on the arithmetic that we've been learning this week and last week, take this real-world problem that's been given to us by a business in your community, determine the mathematics that's required to solve it. It will be the math that we've been talking about for the last several weeks. Come up with as many potential solutions to it that you can. Determine the solution that best answers the problem, and there are absolutes to mathematics. We don't just take fuzzy math and come up with crazy answers. There is a real answer to it. But the most important part is then explain to the rest of your class why you did that. That's where the learning occurs. That's the exciting part of what these standards look like. I get calls. I've got a call this week from an angry parent that says, your teachers are sending this homework home that I don't understand. It's beyond what I learned when I was in school 35 years ago. Good. Thank goodness. I should surely hope that we're asking more of the children today than when I went to school. And the fact that children are struggling and having to think and getting frustrated and having to use their brain to think, and it may be something that's frustrating their parents, I will never apologize for the fact that we're challenging our children to think beyond levels we've ever thought before. But the exciting part comes is when we find out, did they learn it? And you don't find that out by doing some bubble-in test at the end of that experience. You do it like they did at Lincoln Elementary School recently. They had taught this unit in mathematics, and they said, how can we determine if our kids learned it or not? They partnered with McWayne Center right here in Birmingham in a program called If I Had a Hammer, and they brought them in, and in one day, their 5th grade class built a house from the foundation to a completed house in one day. Those children will never forget the mathematical concepts that were required to do that, when they could have done worksheets and bubble in things from now till doomsday and never remembered a thing. They applied what they learned to a real-world situation. That's the sort of authentic instruction and assessment we need to begin to do if we really want kids to be prepared for what comes next. So excited about that. Another thing that we needed to do was look at our assessments. I shared with you why we did away with the graduation exam, and hopefully that was convincing enough that it was yielding almost nothing. But we also needed to make sure that if we were going to give assessments, and we're always going to need to give them just to give us a gauge of how we're doing, we needed something that was meaningful. So we went back to business and industry. We went back to 2-year colleges. We went back to our 4-year colleges. And we said, what assessments do you use to determine if kids get into your school, determine if they get scholarships? In business and industry, what do you use to make sure that they're career ready? And we're very fortunate in the state of Alabama that we're a predominant ACT state. It's been given since I was in high school, so it's not new. Didn't get dreamed up somewhere and brought in. We've done it forever. And we had a group of teachers, administrators, professors, parents come in and say, what assessment do we need to give? And they said, wouldn't it make sense that if we gave assessment that was aligned with those expectations, we would finally be the only state, and we are today, the only state in the United States of America that has an assessment system that is aligned from K to 12 to two-year colleges to four-year colleges in business and industry, so we can actually talk a conversation collectively. We've never had that before. We now do, because we took an assessment that has 50 years of research behind it and decided to backload our assessments down to it, and we now give the ACT Aspire in grades 3 through 8. And let me tell you why we did this. Because we wanted to do what's right for Alabama. You hear a lot about the Common Core test. Those are the tests that are being developed through Race to the Top money that are the two federally funded assessment consortia. We are not part of those. We did our own thing because we had something better. And now we have state after state coming to visit us that are dropping out of those federally funded consortia because they see that Alabama had it right to start with. They didn't buy into this federally funded, federally driven sort of assessment system where they have strings attached to it. We're doing our own thing. But the thing that excites me, Mary Bone, is when we used to sit down with parent conferences. Scott Mohan, you know this. You've got kids. Y'all probably didn't do this in Shelby County, though, before we stole you away. We would call parents in after the assessments came in, and we'd sit down with a parent and we'd say, based on your child's performance, your child had a scale score of 638, which puts them at the 8th stay 9 in math. Tina Neighbors, love you. My cousin right there. I know you would have never done this, but we'd sit down with that parent, we'd go over that, and we'd all smile at each other like we knew what we were talking about, what a scale score was and a stay 9 was, and we'd sign that paper that we said we'd had that meeting, we'd put it in the file, and we'd all go home. We didn't have a clue what we just talked about. Had no clue about what our child knew. But now we have this new assessment called ACT Aspire, so I can go back to Mary Bone and say, based on your child's score in 5th grade math, if we do our job right as educators based on where he or she is right now in 5th grade math, we can predict, if we keep him or her on that learning trajectory they're on, a 36 in math on the ACT. That is a conversation that children understand and parents understand and teachers understand and the people who get our kids understand. That's something to work toward. The thing that we've done differently is we haven't set a cut score like we had on the graduation exam because we don't want to ever put a ceiling on where kids can go. So now we've removed the ceiling so that it's a constant move of moving children forward as far as we can possibly push them. And the nice thing is our state board has also removed some of the rules that we had in place to keep us from doing that. You may or may not know this, but the state board has removed the Carnegie unit. One of the most exciting things we ever did. I'm still not sure everybody understands what we did by that and how profound it is. And you may not even know that it was done to you when you're in public education. But to earn a credit in Alabama public education and in most states across the nation, there's this thing called the Carnegie unit, which means you had to have 140 hours of instruction to get a credit. Now that makes about as much sense as if 735,000 plus kids are all the same, to think that they all need the same number of hours to learn. Now think about that for a minute. We're supposed to be smart people. We've done this for 50 years. Well, we removed the Carnegie unit, which is real disruptive to high school. Don't ask you to go out and do this real quick, but begin to think about it. Is what if on the first day of school, which they did in Oxford City Schools this year, you're my incoming Algebra 1 class. I've never met you before. You just came from whatever middle school. And on the first day of class, I give you my comprehensive Algebra 1 exam that I was going to give you 36 weeks later at the end of a teaching year. And on that first day, the three of you ace it. Why in the world should you have to sit there for 36 weeks to get a credit in Algebra 1 when you just showed me that you have the proficiency that I was going to measure 36 weeks later? We can now grant you your Algebra 1 credit on day 1, move you into geometry or Algebra 2 or whatever we need you to be in, and start pushing our very brightest students to a place we've never been able to push them before. That is exciting, folks. That is exciting. So when you hear the rumor that our new education system is keeping all the kids on the same page at the same place at the same time, it is absolutely the opposite of that. And one of the questions that's been asked is, oh my goodness, we may run out of courses we currently have to offer. What an absolutely wonderful problem to have. What an absolutely great opportunity to partner with our community colleges and our four-year colleges and with business and industry and get kids out into learning experiences that may not look like the schools they've gone to before. Let me tell you what it looks like when it starts to happen in Florence, Alabama. I'd urge anybody to start doing this. We have multiple school systems now that have multiple graduations a year. Why in the world do we just have graduation in May? Why do we do that? Because that's the way we've always done it. Florence has 4 graduations a year. When the kids finish, they graduate. Some of you, as having been a high school principal, I spent most of my life coming up with electives to try to fill up the schedules of the kids who've already finished everything that's required for graduation. They don't want to be in there. The teacher doesn't want to teach it. It is a disaster waiting to happen. Graduate them and turn them loose. Turn them loose. And then let these teachers have a chance to have smaller classes to work with the kids that really need them. There's nothing that says we can't do that. And we can then answer the question to our colleges of engineering, especially engineering in the STEM field. Where are our very brightest students? We've been holding them captive for 25 years in classes they didn't need, that we can now turn them loose and get them into those higher level mathematics classes. Folks, that's exciting, but it's disruptive as heck. Because if you've ever been in a high school and ever been part of designing a high school, we all know how it works. The master schedule gets done in about June, and regardless of the needs of the children, you don't mess with that master schedule. You do not go back and mess with that master schedule. Because we all know that Ricky Darby has had third block planning for the last 25 years. And after we've given that assessment, we realize that we really need Ricky to teach an Algebra 1A class to some kids that we identified in that are behind where we need him to be. But we don't want to mess with Ricky because we know if we move him, he's going to complain and whine for the next 36 weeks. When we're willing to move the grown folks around to make a difference for children, that's when we'll have a public education that will soar. Because if we do that, we'll get the cave dwellers out of the system and we'll get people doing the work we need them to do, and we'll take kids to places they've never been before. It's exciting what that might look like. So what about the kids that come to school not ready to learn? Comprehensive learning supports. Shelby County was one of our 10 systems that did this year. We know that all the services, most of the services that kids need are out there. One of my biggest learning experiences was in Coosa County when I worked there. One of the poorest counties in the state of Alabama. Wonderful people there, $3 generals, and a lot of pine trees. That's it. That's all that's there. Some great schools doing the very best they can, but those kids are poor. Those kids need all sorts of wraparound services. And I met those parents and those children, and I think back to Coosa County every time I go to this slide. And I think, how in the world does this parent, who probably didn't get a good education either because we didn't do a good job with them, who's not well educated, who doesn't have a great job, who doesn't have a broad picture of what's around them, how do they ever connect the dots to get the services their children need or their families need? It's our responsibility as adults to connect those dots for them so that those services that are already out there that don't cost a cent more are readily acceptable to our kids. In this first year pilot, these groups, these school systems identified attendance as one of their biggest obstacles to student success, attendance. And because of their work in 1 year in these 10 school systems, the unexcused absence rate dropped by 25%, and they recouped 110,000 days of instruction. All because they enlisted community groups, churches, parent groups, business and industry around building a wraparound service for kids to make sure that they get to school if they needed transportation. In a couple of systems, they even enlisted volunteers to call kids every morning to tell them to get up to come to school because their parents weren't doing it. That's all it took to motivate those kids that some adult cared enough to call them and tell them to get up to come to school. It's just that simple. Just that simple when grown folks are willing to do this new work. Excited about what that looks like. So, imagine. It's my favorite word in the English language. We've not allowed you to imagine for a long time. And I want you to think about a couple of things as we get ready to close tonight and go to our questions. Imagine school as an experience, not restricted by place and time. Think about that for a second. Think about all the learning experiences that live outside this building. Think about the differences your children have and how we can parlay those unique interests and aptitudes and get them involved in things. Folks, that could be so exciting. And one of the things we've done to help do that is we did away with our diploma options. Another thing that as a high school principal drove me crazy, and I know our high school folks, and especially our counselors, they talked bad about me when we did this. They talked bad about me because it was disruptive. But you know, think about it. I was a high school principal for years, and this is how we did it in Elliott City, and I am ashamed. I think about it every single day, the decisions we made about children that I can't take back, but we're not going to do that anymore. The way we used to do it is I'd take my counselors from Benjamin Russell High School over to Elliott City Middle School, and we'd sit down with their principal and their counselor, and we'd start going through the kids at the middle school. And we'd talk about this one and decide that he or she, they've been stellar at the middle school, so we're going to put them on the advanced diploma. And then we're going to talk about this child for a while, and she didn't do quite as well as he is, so we're going to put this one on the regular diploma. And then this one over here, really need some hands-on stuff, so we're going to put this one on the career technical diploma, which ought to and now is the same expectation as all diplomas. And then over here, this one really has struggled in middle school, so we're going to refer this one to special ed, and he'll end up on the occupational diploma. Now, I have a collective term that I refer to middle schoolers as, and I mean this with great fondness and respect. They're all crazy. They're all crazy. They're sweet. They wake up one day, they're smiling. 10 minutes later, they're crying. You never know what they're going to do. It's just the way they're made. God made them that way. They're just that way. Think about that for a second. We have historically, for 50 years, been making decisions about children at a point in their life when we think they might be crazy that affects them for the rest of their life. And if you work in a high school, 10th grade or up, because 9th graders are still crazy too, if you work 10th grade or up, you have experienced this phenomenon when they come back as 10th graders. You can actually have an intellectual conversation with them. They're nice to be around. They're pleasant. You can count on them. Kids change. So now we have one diploma with multiple options to get there. So the kids that are interested in career and technical education, they may take 2 math courses traditionally and 2 of them through a very highly rigorous career and technical program. We have some kids that do all the AP courses known to man. We may have another child that's so into fine arts that we've got them enrolled in classes outside of the school system because we can't offer them. With artists within our school system, the sky's the limit if we're willing to rethink what that looks like. A policy environment that encourages innovation and creativity and allows safe space for risk and failure. That's what I want more than anything for our teachers. If you look at any successful business in the state of Alabama, every one of them build into their business plan risk and loss. Because when you give space for risk and loss, that's when innovation occurs. That's when thinking occurs. When you try to dictate everything we're going to do, which we've done to you, educators in the room, with our old accountability system, you don't feel free to innovate and create because you feel like something's going to come back and get you. We now have a policy environment to do that. The last one down there, a learning environment where learning is the constant and time the variable, knowing the disruption it will create to the system. We have 735,000 plus unique little people that come to school every day. Every one of them different, every one of them made differently, every one of them with different talents and skills. We now have an education system that every single one of them can have an individual way to get to the same end. And in high school now, the requirement is every single child in high school has an individualized 4-year plan based on their aptitude and their interest that can be changed as it's needed to, as their interests change, but gives them some direction of where we need to go. Folks, that is so exciting to think that what that looks like. So it comes to this. Why do we need to do this? Why do we need to do all of this disruptive change? Why don't we just stay with what we're doing and everybody be happy and go home at the end of the day? We have to do it because of Sam. I met Sam on one of my surprise visits at Blossomwood Elementary School in Huntsville. I walked into this classroom and went over to Sam, and I said, tell me what you're doing. And he's in pre-K, by the way, pre-K. Sam's in pre-K, and he was so proud to show me his letter V on his pad there, on his piece of technology, and he began to explain to me about his V and how many times he wrote it. And I said, well, Sam, if you've written V, then you've probably done your other letters leading up to V. He went, oh, yes, sir, I have it archived right here. You want me to pull it up? Oh, yes, he did. Oh, yes, he did. I couldn't have done it in a million years. He said he pulled up his archive and showed me the rest of his letters, and I could go on about my meeting with Sam, but the reason I share that with you, Sam's not expecting to leave pre-K and walk into a kindergarten or first and second grade classroom and be coloring in maps and sitting in rows and doing in bubble-in sheets and taking a test at the end of the year that you can bubble in and don't get to show what you really know and learn. He's expecting something different, and so are his parents. And if we want public education in our state and our nation to be any different than it is, we have to make sure that the Sams of the world have a very different expectation. They have rigorous expectations and a free and open way to learn however they learn best, whether it's through technology or tradition, but make it work for them, not make it work for us. A system that's driven based on the needs of children, not based on the needs of the adults. That will be a phenomenal thing when we get this all in place. So, that's where we are in public education. We were at a place where we knew we had an opportunity to change. We talked to the people who got our graduates and we said, what do you need from us? And they clearly told us. We set a new bar of what a high school graduate looks like that we're all now working for, whether you're in pre-K, first grade, fifth grade, seventh grade, 12th grade, AP calculus. This is the end game for all of us. We've set a measure to see how we're doing along the way. We've adopted standards that are requiring us to make kids think and be critical and problem solvers along the way. We have an assessment system that's not used as we've used it before to make sure that kids are on a trajectory to be college and career ready so they have choices when they leave high school. We're developing wraparound services, comprehensive learning supports for kids who come to school not ready to learn. We're giving our teachers a new place and a new space to be innovative and creative and come up with a million different ways to teach your children the content that we know they need to know, and setting up a policy environment to rethink school so that we can create school that may look totally different than this absolutely beautiful Helena High School, that you might even take the money that was spent for this and put it into learning opportunities that are all across the community. There's nothing anymore that says we can't do this. Our biggest challenge is sitting in this room. Not you guys, but the grown folks, because we are difficult to change. We are real difficult to change. We can get excited about this stuff, and we can go back home, and then we start sinking back into our comfort zone and wanting our kids to have the same experience we had when we went to school. They're needing something else, folks, because their future is going to be very, very different. So what I need from you, your homework, is to think about what you've heard tonight. Think about what this means to you and whatever role you represent tonight, and what you can do to take this message forward, that we want more for our children. We want an individual path to success. We want to work collectively together. If we could ever take all this political energy that's being used to fight among ourselves and really focus on children, not political agendas, what in the world could we possibly succeed with? And imagine Sam graduating from high school 6 years from now with a whole new pathway because we rethought what school needed to look like. That's a reality. That can be our reality. We have created a system that allows us to do that. Now we have to stay the course. Everything is now in place, is to stay the course to make this happen. I thank you. I thank you so much for sitting through whatever it is I might have shared with you tonight that rang a bell with you. But I need you. Our children need you to advance this plan and help us stay the course to do what's right for children. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you. Sit down. Sit down, sit down, sit down. Don't need all that foolishness. Okay, we got questions to answer.
All right, we're going to start with the question. Testing. All right, is this on? Okay, it's on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, what do you say to the parent whose child is struggling doing math the new way and the parent can't help? How do you overcome the frustration and the anger?
Is go back. Every time I get that call, I ask them, have you sat down with your teacher and visited the classroom to see how this is working? If we do it together, those frustrations and those things that I know are out there can be resolved very quickly. So we're more than willing. The people that teach in our schools are more than willing to sit down and talk about those issues with us. Don't let your anger cloud what we know we need our kids to do.
Summer school is offered to only academically challenged students. Can this privilege be offered to all students?
There is nothing anywhere that says who has to go to summer school. We just continue to do summer school the way we do summer school because that's the way we've always done summer school. I would ask you, why in the world do we even have school the way we have it now? Why does summer school even have to be an issue? So the question is, could summer school be used for advancement? Could it be used for X? I've just told you tonight, the rules have been changed. If a school system in a community is ready to do something different, go do it. I was fortunate to work in a school system that was willing to go with me when I tried to push innovative things. We went to a year-round sort of schedule. We started school in mid-July. We went for 9 weeks, and we were out for 2 in the fall. We went for 9 more weeks. We were out for 3 at Christmas. We went for 9 more weeks, and we were out for 2 in the spring. We went for 9 more weeks, and we were out for about 5 in the summer, because we knew in our poverty-ridden school system that summer learning loss was real. And if we know that, why don't we continue to have summer the way we've always had it? So we had individual breaks throughout the year so we could accelerate the learning of those kids that got behind. We could enrich the lives of those kids who don't have access to enrichment sorts of things. It was wonderful. It gave teachers, and the teachers in this room, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There comes that point where everybody needs to go back to their corners and take a breath. It gave everybody a breath every 9 weeks. The children, their parents, the teachers, they were refreshed every 9 weeks. It was absolutely wonderful. Y'all should do this in Shelby County, in Vincent, years ago. Years ago. We modeled it after them. We loved it. But eventually money got tight, and it was a little more expensive to do it that way. So we had to change, regretfully. But yeah, go do what you want to.
Next question. I've been told there are schools in Alabama participating in data mining, subscribed by Common Core policy guidelines using facial expression cameras and wireless sensors. Were parents notified that you were using and implementing these devices?
I would challenge anybody in this room to show me where we have a facial camera device that we're measuring the facial expressions of children and data mining anything. My God, we can't even afford to buy a textbook. How are we going to buy that stuff? Good Lord. You know, it's that sort of stuff that is just, folks, get real. Show me a classroom. Walk to a classroom tomorrow and call me and tell me to be there and prove to me that that exists. I'll be there.
Next question. How are we going to pay for the career technical education aspects? They added 2,000 classrooms and the additional counselors that need to be added.
Didn't know anything about 2,000 new classrooms, not where that came from, but our legislature just approved where's Philip? Philip, where are you? How many thousand, what was our bond issue? $50 million, so the legislature's paying for that, but we're doing something very different. We're not just passing out the money so somebody can go just create something. We're asking our school systems to partner with business and industry, their 2-year college system, pulling in our workforce development councils and looking at the 5 to 10-year projections of what jobs are needed so that any program that opens from this point forward and repurposing the ones we have are aligned with what the expectations are. That is very, very different. So we have a fund to do that already.
Okay, as you may know, research results released by the NIH from 1994 concluded that 1 in 5 people have dyslexia. At this time, many parents are being told that Alabama schools do not recognize or make accommodations for students who have dyslexia. How does Plan 2020 address this? Absolutely.
Having been a special education teacher, I understand and taught dyslexic children. It is regretful that that misinformation is out there, and if you're in a system where those children aren't getting the services they need, I need to know that. We provide training every summer to as many teachers as we can find that we know teach children that are dyslexic. It's a very real and very frustrating, not disability, but challenge that many of our children have. It doesn't fall under special education because that's a federal law that dictates what it is. It can fall under a 504 plan if it's just disruptive to their education environment. But the main thing is to get teachers that are trained and qualified to work with children that are dyslexic. So if we have that not happening, I need to know that. There's nothing that says we can't do that.
Do school waivers allow for the creation of a brand new school, not just innovation within a school?
That's totally up to a local community. The question is, one of the things that our state board did and the legislature has now done is create an opportunity for a local community and a local superintendent and people at schools to decide they want to do something different. Could that be a totally different school? Could that be school at night? Could that be whatever? It can be whatever the community decides they need it to be if it's based on what the needs of the children are. It is one of the things when we released it that people get real frustrated with me about is they call and say, when are you going to put out the list of the things that we can ask waivers from, that we can ask flexibility for? There will never be a list from my office. The minute I give a list, I've just shut down the creativity that lives in local communities and local faculties to do that. So get creative. Push the limit. Push me as far as you can push me to not do something illegal. I won't do it illegal. I won't let you go to jail, and I'm not going with you. But we can get real close to the edge to do what's right for kids.
Can you honestly look us in the eye and tell us that your plan will take us from the bottom tier of states in education to a top tier state, especially when our eighth graders recently ranked last among the states in math, that is?
Can I give you a promise that it's going to work? I absolutely cannot, but I can tell you one thing. If we all work together and believe in our children, it can happen. If we believe and stop bickering among ourselves and dividing ourselves politically around things that aren't real, it can happen, because let me tell you why, and this isn't an excuse about our 8th grade NAEP reports. Yes, we were at the very bottom in 8th grade math. If you look at the test we've been asking and giving our children for the last multiple years, the Alabama Reading and Math Test, if you take what we in Alabama had said is proficient in mathematics for the state of Alabama and compare that to NAEP, it equates to their below basic expectation on NAEP. There's no surprise when we got the results we have. We've now changed all that. That is no longer our test. It is no longer our expectation. You will see a difference when we do NAEP again, I can assure you.
Will having teachers to re-earn tenure ensure teachers have to perform without continued cost to the education system?
Say that again.
Will having teachers re-earn tenure ensure that teachers perform without having continued cost or additional cost to the education system?
You know, tenure can either be used as an excuse or whatever. I mean, tenure is not going to fix anything. What's going to fix, and most teachers, I would say, if you ask most teachers in the state of Alabama, tenure is not what they work for. They work for children. If we begin to resource and support our teachers to do the work we need them to do, that's where the difference will be, and they'll do whatever we ask them to do, but they've got to have some resources and support to do that. Tenure is not the key. Tenure is just not the issue, and we use it as an excuse in a lot of places to keep people that possibly need to go do something else, and we use an excuse on the other end to explain why we don't get the results we need to be. It's just an excuse.
Next question. What is your view on public charter schools? Do you think our state is heading in the right direction given the emphasis on innovation in the classroom?
I'll say the same thing I've said for the last 10 years about charter schools, and I have some friends in the room that can verify this. If I was still a local superintendent in Alexander City, and I wanted to make the very best decisions I could for my children and my community, I'd want on my menu every possible option, including charter schools. Not that it's any better or any worse than anything else. It's all contextual. Because what you do is you sit down and look at the needs of your children. And if the needs of your children show that they need something that's not working in any other venue, then maybe that's all right. The problem is we're leading with this charge of we need charter schools. That's the wrong place to start. What are the needs of the children? And lay all the options on the table and not be afraid of it, because we have some schools that we've been able to go into and turn around pretty quickly, but if I got into one that I can't get turned around because of the grown folks, I may want to charter it so I can get rid of the grown folks and turn it around. So I'm not opposed to it.
Next
because
question.
I believe in doing what's right for children.
I've heard that Common Core changes history and science in upper grades, leaving out slavery, not teaching about democracy, teaching evolution. Are these things true, and if not, where are they originating?
Absolutely the truth. Good gracious. Number one, to clarify that, there were only 2 areas of academics that were addressed in the Common Core, math and English language arts. So obviously it doesn't affect social studies and science. So let's just put that one to sleep. Yes, we still teach slavery. Yes, we still teach the founding documents. Yes, we still do all the things we've always done in social studies. The Common Core office is not dictating to us that we can't teach that anymore. Ask any teacher in this classroom that we still teach slavery and the founding documents and that the Declaration of Independence is the basis upon which we built our country. Yeah, we still do that. Okay.
Can you please address the latest hoopla about sex education in our schools and how it's being handled in public schools?
Oh, yes. That's the new one that's out there. We've adopted the national sexuality standards, and in kindergarten we're having conversations with children about sex, and we've hired sexually skilled and trained teachers to implement it. I read it. I sent it out in a memo to all our superintendents. Not happening. Not happening. Not in Alabama. Maybe happening in New York. Ain't happening in Alabama. It's not happening. It's not happening. We have a health course of study that you go online and read, and that's what our teachers use to teach health to our children. We have not adopted the national sexuality standards across the state of Alabama. Hadn't happened. Not going to.
Okay. When will teachers' professional development take place? They need time to let it sink in. They need time to plan and work together.
That's exactly what we've been attempting to do over the last 2 years. We've totally repurposed the State Department of Education into regional teams that are working with individual school systems to develop customized and individual plans of support for those school systems. Has every teacher been given the opportunity to participate in that? I can't say that. But we know that we've set up a structure so that that is our focus and has been for the last 2 years. You can adopt standards from now until doomsday, but if you don't repurpose and retrain the teachers, what was the point? So we've been doing that, and we will continue to do that year after year after year because we've got all the foundational changes have occurred. Our goal now is to stay the course and take our educators and give them the support and resources they need to do this new work, and make sure that we don't use our assessments and accountability system to come get them, that we give them a space to make mistakes and learn through this process.
I know you say Common Core Plan 2020 standards are higher, but AP History has all but dropped mention of George Washington, the rest of the Founding Fathers, the Civil War. How could this be a higher standard?
AP is not part of Common Core.
Next question.
All I can say.
Aren't elementary and intermediate teachers allowed to give spelling or vocabulary tests?
Because of the Common Core. I don't know. That's a good question. That's a darn good question. I have no idea. That's a local decision. I have no idea. If that's not happening, talk to your local folks.
The ones I'm passing over are redundant. They've been asked before. How soon will the new changes in Alabama's education path be implemented and seen at the local school level?
Everything that has been changed is now at least 2 years in, and that was the results I shared with you tonight. We've seen our graduation rate increase by 8%. We've seen our remediation rate decrease by 5%. We're beginning to see our AP scores soar. We were first in the nation in the increase in qualifying scores on AP, which shows that if we expect kids to do difficult, rigorous work, they can do it. We're beginning to see those changes already. We didn't get here overnight, and you're not going to see this miraculous thing occur tomorrow. It is a process through which we continue to do continuous improvement, and when we stay the course, which is sometimes difficult for us to do, we will see those changes continue to grow, grow, and grow.
Speaking of disruptions, as a first-year CTE teacher, how do you plan in health science? How do you plan to preserve precious class time? I find so many disruptions throughout our day, meetings, plans, filling out papers, etc.
And this isn't a cop-out, but as state superintendent, I believe totally in local control, in local school systems. That's a conversation to have with your local administrators if you don't have time to do that. I can't fix that.
You mentioned over and over the brightest students. What about the students who may be bright but need help or assistance?
Absolutely. The nice thing about our new plan, under No Child Left Behind, we had cut scores where we were working everybody toward a cut score. Regretfully, under that model, the subgroup of students in our state that made the most progress over the last 5 years were our special ed students. But because they didn't make it to some arbitrary cut score, they didn't get credit for their work, nor did their teachers or their parents get credit for the huge progress they made. Our new system says is a growth model. So regardless of where you start, the three of you may be at three totally different starting points in mathematics. As long as we're showing growth, then everybody's winning. That's the new model. So it applies to all children. Brightest to those that struggle the most academically. We have a responsibility to show growth with all of them.
What does it mean that there's 12% availability is now in pre-K programs? What does availability mean? How many percent are actually enrolled in pre-K, and when will we have 50%?
What the 12% means is right now 12% of the projected eligible students that could be in a 4-year pre-K program are currently enrolled in it because that's all the funding that's currently available. When will we get to 50%? I have no earthly idea. Depends on the funding that comes from the legislature. But what we are doing that is very different is our pre-K program across the state can be diverse delivery. It doesn't all have to happen in public school. It can be in churches. It can be in private daycare. It can be wherever that is created as long as it meets the first class standards, which Alabama leads the nation in having standards about what a quality pre-K program looks like. That is the goal to get into all of our pre-K programs. And the places where we've had it now, we're beginning to see those kids enter public education, and they're soaring. Folks, if we really want to make a difference in public education, investing in pre-K is where it is, because if there's kindergarten teachers in the room, you know this as well as anybody. If you've had a child that has lived in abject poverty for the first 5 years of their life, and they've never seen a book, had one read to them, end up at school and have never even heard their real name called, it is hard to catch them up. So we know that pre-K and that investment is invaluable to the future of this state.
Even though we value Common Core, how do we balance meeting and surpassing the standards with valuing the student's individual and unique passions and talents.
Absolutely, and that's why we did away with the diploma options that I mentioned. Regardless of the standard, we now give kids, they can get there as fast as they want to, they can get there at different times, they can get there through different courses. Unlike what you hear, we're not restricting them and holding them captive. We've actually turned them loose, not because of Common Core, but because of that's the way we're now teaching in Alabama. It's not restricted by Common Core.
Have we considered providing tuition reimbursement for teachers just as industry and corporate America does for their employees?
Absolutely. We had it in our state budget that went across to the legislature last year to recruit the very brightest students out of high school and scholarship them to become a teacher, with the requirement that their only payback is that they serve so many years in a high-need school in a high-need area. Regretfully, we got no funding for that. We absolutely believe in that. That's a model that works. When you visit other countries that are outpacing us academically, the very brightest students are the only students that are allowed to go into teacher preparation, and there's scholarship to do that. There are models, and we're trying to get there, and it will be in our budget again this year. Hopefully, there'll be some funding for it.
Can you cite research that shows evidence that doing math differently in the elementary years will better prepare our young students for the future?
I can't quote the research behind it. There is a lot of research that says inquiry-based learning in partnership with basic learning wins for all. We haven't chosen to do one or the other. We're doing both, and that's the difference. You know, you hear a lot of times we've moved to fuzzy math. The fuzzy math may be, I guess, that we're asking kids to think and problem solve and come up with different solutions. And people will say, well, you're doing away with the absolutes of basic math. No, we're not. We teach that too. But then we ask something else of them. So, no.
Can you please clearly articulate how Common Core standards factor into your Alabama Plan 2020?
I think I just spent okay. I'll give it a shot. Give it a shot. What we needed were standards that ask our children to think critically, to problem solve, to work together, to collaborate, to become lifelong learners, and to be able to defend what they decide in writing, verbally, or whatever. That's the only difference in our new standards and our old standards, is what we're expecting the outcome to be for our students.
Did we not apply for Race to the Top funds?
Sure did, but didn't get it. Thank goodness. Did we apply for Race to the Top funds? Yes, we did. We didn't get it. Thank goodness. Most states that got it would like to give it back. So we're not tied to any of that federal government stuff that falls under Race to the Top. Thank goodness.
The last one I have is not a question but a comment. While no code sets the school year as August to May, there are approximately 100,000 divorce settlements awarding children to a parent for 1 month each summer. Dramatically changing the school year will require many divorce settlements to change.
Okay.
All right, well, that's just it.
Can't fix divorce. Can't go there. Not touching that one. Give me some math to work, I can work on it, but I'm not touching divorce. Thank you all very much. Thank you. And thank you.